It all began on a cold October evening in a small town in Pennsylvania. Jake, a 28-year-old graphic designer, had just moved into an old Victorian house he'd inherited from his late uncle. The house was charming, but creaky, filled with shadows that seemed to linger long after the sun had set. At first, everything seemed normal, until the noises started. The first night, Jake heard footsteps above him. At first, he thought it was the house settling, or maybe a stray animal. But then he noticed things missing. A book here, a jacket there. It was as if someone else was living inside the house with him. Who could it be? And more importantly, why had they never been discovered? Determined to find answers, Jake began searching the attic, the only part of the house he hadn't explored thoroughly. As he climbed the narrow stairs, a cold breeze brushed past him, and the dim light flickered. What he found would change everything he thought he knew about his home and himself. Jake hesitated at the top of the attic stairs. The wooden boards creaked under his weight as he stepped inside the cramped, dusty space. Moonlight filtered weakly through a small, grimy window, casting long shadows over forgotten boxes and old furniture covered in white sheets. The air smelled stale, like years of neglect. He had expected the attic to be empty, just cobwebs and memories. But something felt off. The silence was too thick, almost like it was holding its breath. Suddenly, a faint shuffling sound broke the quiet. Jake froze. His heart hammered in his chest. Was he imagining things? Then, from behind a stack of crates, a pale face emerged, sunken eyes staring directly at him. Jake stumbled back, nearly falling down the stairs. "Who's there?" he called out, trying to keep his voice steady. The figure didn't answer. Instead, it stepped forward. A young man, disheveled, with clothes torn and dirty. His eyes were wild, desperate. "I've been here," the stranger whispered hoarsely, "for months." Jake's mind raced. How was this possible? Who was this man? Question mark. And why had he hidden in the attic? The stranger explained slowly. His name was Eli, a runaway who'd found refuge in the abandoned house after escaping a dangerous situation. He'd lived in the shadows, surviving on scraps and hiding from anyone who might find him. But as the days passed, Jake sensed there was more to Eli's story. Something darker. One night, Jake woke to the sound of whispers coming from the attic. He climbed up to check, but the space was empty. The air was colder than before, and the shadows seemed to shift and stretch, twisting into shapes that danced just beyond sight. Eli warned Jake not to explore too much. something was watching them. Something that didn't want them to leave. Tension grew as strange occurrences escalated. Objects moved on their own. Chilling drafts swept through locked rooms, and the faint sound of footsteps echoed through empty hallways. Jake decided to investigate the house's history and uncovered chilling details. Previous owners had vanished mysteriously. Rumors of curses and restless spirits haunted the neighborhood. One stormy evening, the attic door slammed shut behind Jake as he ascended the stairs alone. Trapped, he faced the darkness that had been stalking them. Realizing the true horror wasn't Eli or the house. The story unfolds as Jake fights to survive, uncovering secrets that challenge his sanity and force him to confront fears he never knew he had. Jake's breath came in ragged gasps as the attic door slammed shut with a deafening bang. The sudden darkness swallowed the weak moonlight. Panic surged through him, but he forced himself to stay calm. He fumbled for his phone, only to realize there was no signal, and the flashlight app was dead. The stale, musty air pressed down on him like a weight. His eyes strained to adjust, but the shadows seemed alive, flickering and twisting just beyond his sight. A low, guttural whisper echoed from the far corner. Jake's heart thundered. He took a cautious step forward. The floorboards creaked beneath him. "Show yourself," he called out, voice trembling but determined. The whispering ceased. A cold breeze brushed past him, carrying the faint scent of decay. Suddenly, the shadows converged, coalescing into a vague, shifting form. Jake could barely make out a gaunt figure with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce into his soul. "Leave," it hissed, voice like dry leaves rustling. "This place is mine." Jake shook his head, backing away slowly. "Who are you? What do you want?" The figure laughed, a sound like bones scraping. "I am the silence between the walls, the watcher in the dark. I feed on fear and solitude." Desperation surged in Jake's chest. He had to escape, but the attic seemed to stretch endlessly, the walls closing in. Memories of Eli's warnings flashed through his mind. The stranger wasn't just hiding. He was trapped too, caught in the web of the house's curse. Jake scrambled toward the stairs, but the shadows blocked his path, thickening into a wall of darkness. He closed his eyes, forcing himself to breathe steadily. Then, recalling a fragment of a story he'd heard as a child, about how light could drive away darkness, he fumbled for a matchbox in his pocket. With trembling fingers, he struck a match. The small flame flickered, casting sharp light on the shadowy figure. It recoiled, screeching like a wounded beast, and the shadows pulled back. Jake dashed down the stairs, heart pounding, desperate to escape the haunted attic. When he burst out into the cold night air, he gasped, chest heaving. Behind him, the house fell silent once more, hiding its terrible secret in the shadows. But Jake knew one thing. The darkness was still there, waiting. Jake didn't stop running until the flickering streetlights of the neighborhood came into view. His legs burned, lungs gasped for air, but adrenaline pushed him onward. Behind him, the old house sat silent and dark, its windows like empty eyes, watching his retreat. He slowed near a street corner, leaning against a lamppost, trying to steady his breath. The night's chill bit into his skin, but it was nothing compared to the cold dread creeping over him. Questions flooded his mind. Who was that entity in the attic? How long had it been living there? And why had it chosen Jake? His phone buzzed suddenly. A text from Eli. "Did you get out okay?" Jake's fingers trembled as he typed back. "Barely. Something's wrong with that house." Minutes later, Eli called. "Jake, listen. I think the house is a prison. Not just for people, but for whatever's trapped inside. It feeds on isolation, on fear. You disturbed it." Jake swallowed hard. "What do I do? It chased me out." "Stay with someone. Don't be alone. And whatever you do, don't go back there." Jake nodded, though Eli couldn't see him. The weight of the night's terror settled heavily on his shoulders. As he walked toward his friend's place, the streetlights flickered once more, and in the darkness beyond, a shadow stirred. Jake's steps quickened as he neared Eli's house, his mind racing with everything that had happened. The image of that dark figure in the attic, its hollow eyes watching him, wouldn't leave his thoughts. Every creak of a branch or rustle of leaves made him flinch. Eli opened the door before Jake could even knock. "You look like hell," Eli said, stepping aside. Jake collapsed into the living room couch, exhaustion crashing over him. "I never want to go back there," he said, voice shaking. Eli nodded, closing the door firmly behind him. "You did something that house didn't want. Maybe it's been waiting for years to be disturbed." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Eli pulled out an old book from the shelf, its spine cracked and worn. "This might help. It's about that neighborhood. Old stories, hauntings." Jake leaned in as Eli flipped through pages filled with faded handwriting and yellowed photographs. "See here," Eli pointed. "The old Franklin house. It says it was abandoned for decades because people claimed something lived in the attic. But no one ever..." Eli looked serious. "We need to figure out what it wants before it decides to come find you." Jake nodded, feeling the weight of Eli's words settle like a heavy fog in the room. "What do we do next?" he asked. Eli closed the book gently and stood up. "First, we gather more information. Old town records. Maybe talk to neighbors who lived near the house before it was abandoned. We need to understand what this thing is and why it's tied to that attic." Jake rubbed his temples, exhaustion and fear swirling inside him. But he knew one thing. He couldn't let this go. Not after what he saw, and not if the entity was still lurking in the shadows, waiting. "All right," Jake said, determination creeping into his voice. "Let's find out what's really going on." As the night deepened outside, the two friends planned their next steps, unaware that in the attic of the Franklin house, a pair of hollow eyes watched through cracked wood, waiting patiently for its next move. Jake and Eli spent the next day diving into the town archives and old newspapers. They uncovered stories of disappearances, strange noises, and sightings around the Franklin house dating back decades. One particularly chilling article told of a young woman who vanished without a trace, last seen near the attic window. That evening, armed with newfound knowledge and a sense of urgency, Jake and Eli returned to the house. The air was colder, heavier somehow, as if the house itself was watching. They moved cautiously, flashlights cutting through the darkness. Up in the attic, the floorboards creaked beneath their feet. The shadowy presence felt closer now, more tangible. Suddenly, a whisper echoed, a low, desperate plea for help. The eyes from before glimmered in the corner, but this time the figure shifted, revealing a faded portrait of a woman hanging on the wall, her eyes hauntingly familiar. Eli gasped. "It's her! The missing woman!" Jake realized then that whatever haunted the attic wasn't evil. It was trapped, waiting for someone to free it. Jake's heart pounded as he stared at the faded portrait. The woman's eyes seemed to hold a story, a silent plea that echoed through the shadows of the attic. The whispered voice grew clearer, repeating a name, Margaret. Eli stepped closer, his flashlight illuminating a stack of old letters, tied with a faded ribbon. He handed them to Jake, who carefully untied the bundle. The letters were dated decades ago, filled with sorrow and desperation, revealing a tragic tale of betrayal and confinement. As Jake read aloud, the pieces began to fit together. Margaret had been trapped in the attic by someone she once trusted, her cries unheard until now. The entity wasn't a monster. It was her restless spirit, bound by unfinished business. Determined to help, Jake and Eli planned a ritual to release Margaret's spirit. They gathered the necessary items and prepared the attic, the air thick with anticipation. As the ritual began, the temperature dropped and shadows danced wildly. A final whisper, a tear in the air, and then silence. The oppressive weight lifted, replaced by a peaceful calm. Margaret was finally free. The calm that settled over the attic felt almost surreal after the intense moments of the ritual. Jake and Eli exchanged weary glances, the silence hanging heavy in the air. For the first time since entering the house, the oppressive feeling was gone, replaced by a gentle warmth that seemed to seep into the very walls. Jake took a deep breath, his mind racing with thoughts. "Do you think she's really free?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. Eli nodded slowly, eyes scanning the now peaceful attic. "I believe so. The energy has shifted. It's lighter. Whatever was holding her here is gone." They began to pack their things, the atmosphere feeling less threatening, almost inviting. Yet, as Jake turned to take one last look around, a faint breeze stirred the letters on the floor, flipping one open. The words written there made his blood run cold. "Beware the one who set me free." Suddenly, the comforting warmth seemed to flicker, shadows returning just at the edge of the room. The attic, the breeze whispered again, carrying a chilling draft that wrapped around Jake like a cold hand. The warning written on the letter echoed in his mind. "Beware the one who set me free." The attic's shadows seemed to stretch and twist, as if alive, watching them with unseen eyes. Jake's breath hitched. "Eli, did you feel that? Like something just moved behind us?" Eli swallowed hard. "Yeah, maybe it's just nerves." But Jake knew better. The house was far from finished with them. The spirit of Margaret was free, but her release had awakened something else, something darker. They hurried down the attic stairs, each creak sounding like a scream in the silence. Once outside, the night air was cool, but safe, or so they thought. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. Images of the attic danced behind his eyelids, and the warning lingered like a shadow over his thoughts. He wondered what exactly Margaret meant by the one who set me free. The next morning, Jake met with Eli at a local coffee shop, their usual haunt. They pored over the letters again, searching for clues. "There's something else here," Jake said, pointing to a passage in one of the letters. Margaret mentioned a man, someone she trusted but who betrayed her. Could he be the one she warned about? Eli nodded grimly. Maybe releasing her spirit was just the first step. Maybe we unleashed him too. Days passed, and strange things began to happen. Jake noticed shadows flickering just out of sight, cold spots in his apartment, and a sense of being watched. One evening, as he sat alone, the lights flickered and his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You shouldn't have done that." Fear tightened around him like a noose. Determined to uncover the truth, Jake and Eli dove deeper into the town's history, uncovering forgotten records about Margaret's family and the mysterious man who had vanished without a trace. Their investigation led them to an old cemetery, where an unmarked grave lay hidden beneath twisted roots. "This has to be him," Eli whispered. Suddenly, the ground trembled, and a low growl echoed through the trees. A shadow moved between the graves, eyes glowing with a malevolent light. Jake's heart pounded. The game had changed. They weren't just chasing a ghost anymore. They were confronting something far more dangerous. The shadow lingered at the edge of the graveyard, its form flickering like a flame caught in the wind. Jake took a cautious step forward, Eli right behind him. "Who are you?" Jake called out, voice steady despite the pounding in his chest. The figure didn't answer, but instead moved closer, the glowing eyes boring into them like piercing daggers. The temperature dropped sharply, frost forming on the blades of grass beneath their feet. Eli whispered, "We shouldn't be here," but Jake was already too deep, too drawn into the mystery to back away now. Suddenly, the shadow lunged, but before it could reach them, a sudden blast of wind knocked it back, scattering leaves and dust. A voice echoed from behind. "Leave this place," the voice warned. They turned to see an elderly man stepping through the fog, eyes sharp and wary. "I'm Samuel," he said. "I know what you've stirred. You need to stop before it's too late." Jake exchanged a glance with Eli. "What do you mean? What is that thing?" Samuel sighed deeply. "You freed a curse older than this town itself. That shadow is the one Margaret feared, the betrayer. He's bound by no law but his own hunger for revenge." The weight of those words settled over them like a shroud. "How do we stop him?" Eli asked. Samuel looked around nervously. "You can't. Not alone. You need to find the others, those tied to this curse. Only together can you hope to end it." Jake clenched his fists. "Then that's what we'll do, no matter what." As Samuel turned to leave, the shadow reappeared, snarling in the distance. The hunt had only just begun. Jake and Eli followed Samuel through the thickening fog, their breaths visible in the cold night air. The town behind them seemed to shrink away, swallowed by shadows and silence. Samuel's lantern cast eerie flickers of light onto the twisted trees lining the path. "Who are these others?" Jake asked, his voice low. Samuel glanced back, eyes sharp. "Families who made a pact long ago. The curse tied them together, and it's their blood that can break it. But beware, some don't want the curse ended." Eli shivered. "What happened to Margaret, the woman who lived in the old house?" Samuel hesitated. "She tried to fight it alone. The shadow got to her. We lost her, and now it's coming for the rest." They reached a clearing where an ancient oak tree stood. Samuel stopped and pulled a small, worn book from his coat. "This is the key," he said. "It holds the rituals, the history, and the truth. But it's dangerous knowledge." Jake took the book carefully, the leather worn and pages yellowed. As he opened it, a chill ran down his spine. The first page showed a symbol, eerily familiar, the same mark Eli had seen carved on the attic floor. Suddenly, a distant scream pierced the night. The shadow was close again. Samuel's voice was urgent. "We need to move, now!" As they hurried away, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that the shadow was watching, waiting for a mistake. The game had become deadly real. The trio hurried through the woods, the fog thickening like a living blanket that swallowed sound and light. The scream echoed again, this time closer, more desperate. Eli's heart pounded in his chest as he glanced nervously over his shoulder. "Do you think it's her?" Eli whispered, clutching the book tighter. Samuel didn't answer. His face was grim, eyes scanning the darkness for movement. Jake kept his lantern high, trying to cut through the suffocating mist, but the shadows seemed to twist and dance just beyond its reach. Suddenly, the ground beneath them shifted, and Eli stumbled, nearly dropping the book. He caught himself on a gnarled root, breath hitching. "We have to keep moving," Samuel said, urgency rising in his voice. "The longer we stay here, the more vulnerable we become." They pressed on until the trees thinned, revealing the ruins of an old stone chapel, half consumed by ivy and decay. The air was colder here, heavy with something ancient and unseen. Samuel approached the altar, now cracked and broken, and began tracing strange symbols in the dirt. "This place was once the heart of the curse," he murmured. "If we're going to end this, it starts here." Jake opened the book, scanning the pages for the ritual. The words were in an old dialect, almost impossible to decipher, but a sketch showed a circle with symbols that matched those Samuel had drawn. "We need to form the circle and read these words," Samuel explained, "but it has to be perfect. One mistake, and we unleash more than we can handle." As they prepared, a cold wind blew through the ruins, carrying faint whispers that seemed to come from all directions. Eli swallowed hard, feeling eyes on them from the shadows. "Ready?" Samuel asked. Jake nodded, his hand trembling slightly as he began reciting the first lines. The ground beneath them rumbled softly. The shadows writhed closer. The final moment had come. The air thickened, charged with an unseen force that pressed against their skin like icy fingers. Jake's voice faltered for a moment, the ancient words twisting awkwardly on his tongue. Samuel shot him a sharp glance, urging him silently to continue. Eli gripped the book tighter, the pages seeming to pulse with energy. As Jake reached the final phrase, the symbols etched into the dirt began to glow with an eerie blue light. The whispers crescendoed into a chorus of agonized wails, echoing from the dark corners of the forest around them. Shadows poured from the surrounding trees, writhing like living smoke, seeking the circle, seeking them. Samuel stepped into the circle, arms raised, chanting with steady resolve. Jake and Eli followed, their voices joining his, in a crescendo that battled the rising chaos. Suddenly, a piercing shriek cut through the night, and a dark figure burst from the shadows, lunging toward Eli. He stumbled backward, heart racing, as cold breath brushed his neck. The figure's face was obscured, but its eyes burned with malevolence. "Hold the line," Samuel commanded, his voice unwavering, despite the fear gripping them all. With a desperate, final chant, the circle flared brighter, and the figure screamed as if torn apart by invisible chains. The shadows recoiled, writhing and twisting, before vanishing into the night. The forest fell silent. Eli collapsed, gasping for breath. The book slipped from his hands, its glow fading. Samuel looked around, eyes haunted but victorious. "It's done, for now." But Eli couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching, waiting. As the first gray light of dawn seeped through the dense canopy, the three friends sat silently, exhaustion and relief mingling in the cool morning air. The oppressive heaviness that had clung to the night was lifted, yet an uneasy tension lingered, like a shadow that refused to fade. Jake glanced toward the old house that loomed just beyond the tree line, their only refuge from the wilds of the forest. The place had seemed deserted, but now he wondered what secrets it truly held. The attic, with its creaking boards and dark corners, had been the epicenter of their fear. But what else was hidden within those walls? Samuel broke the silence. "We stopped it tonight, but I don't think it's gone for good. Whatever was in that attic, it's tied to that place, and it's patient." Eli nodded, eyes fixed on the cracked window pane. "I don't want to go back, but maybe we don't have a choice. If it's waiting for something or someone." Jake's hand brushed against the old book lying on the table, the pages now dull and lifeless. Maybe this book is the key, or the curse. We need answers. The three exchanged grim looks, the weight of what they had faced sinking in deeper than the physical exhaustion. They were no longer just friends out for a night of exploration. They were the last line of defense against something ancient, something that had waited in the shadows of that attic for decades, maybe longer. As they packed their things, a cold breeze swept through the cracked door, carrying with it a faint whisper, almost inaudible, but unmistakable. Not finished. The hair on Jake's neck stood on end. The fight wasn't over, and the attic still held its secrets, waiting patiently for the next chapter to unfold. If you want to discover what really lurked in that attic, and what fate awaited Jake, Samuel, and Eli, make sure to subscribe and follow the story as it unfolds. The darkness is far from gone.